What's up, everybody? Matt Gajewski here, back again with the Awesemo channel, talking some college football DFS. It is week one. We had a little debut action last night with Jacksonville State taking on UAB. UAB gets the shutout win. And today we are going to move things forward to the Thursday night slate where we have 8 games, some hot rivalry matchups. But before we get started, hit the thumbs up button, subscribe to the channel. Make sure you hit the notification bell so you know when this and all other content goes live, including our college football live before locks, these strategy shows, and everything else we have to offer. We are going to be showing you some of the awesome tools we have available in our college football package, which includes things like projections, depth charts, write-ups, and we'll show you some of the data tools today as we talk about some of these teams. And we're going to kick off an 8-game slate with Temple taking on Rutgers. This game offers some DFS potential. It's not one of the higher total games here. You have a 52.5 point total. Rutgers is a 14.5 point favorite. So on the Temple side, there's not too much we want to look at right away. D'Wan Mathis, the former Georgia signal caller, will be calling the shots here for Temple. Fortunately for D'Wan Mathis, Temple's a little bit pass heavier, and they're pretty fast. They were 24th in plays per game last year, which means D'Wan Mathis should at least have some potential here to get a lot of passes off. But he's not a guy that really performed well in a short time with Georgia, and his completion percentage was below 50%. Now, there's not much dual threat ability with Mathis. I think he's someone that you could pretty much leave for others to play. The only real targets we want to look at for Temple are going to be in the running backfield. They listed Edward Sadie as the starter. He's just $3K on DraftKings. Ravon Bonner's been hurt in camp, and Iverson Clement's away from the team right now. So maybe a potential flyer with Sadie at running back. And then receivers, a position where you may be able to get some cheap targets. The 3 listed starters are Jaden Blue, Randall Jones, and Jose Barbin. Blue and Jones are known commodities. They've been with the team for a while. Blue's been over 1,000 yards before, plays mostly in the slot. Randall Jones missed most of 2019 with an injury, but had 445 yards in 2018. Barbin has been basically a part-time player, but he replaces Brandon Mack here. So potential players to look at. And moving over to the Rutgers side, this is a spot where we could get some really cheap players. Rutgers actually has a pretty good implied team total here because they are such heavy favorites. So their implied team total over 30 points. They're another team that's pretty pass heavy, and they run a lot of plays. They were 34th in plays per game. Noah Vidral is the returning starter here. He's actually a very good price-adjusted play at 5,900 because he has good dual threat ability. He's not the most active passer, but he did rush for 193 yards in a limited season last year, which is very nice. In the backfield, it's a 2-man committee because Penny Boone has been hurt. Isaiah Pacheco is the player who gets about 60% of the work, and then you have Aaron Young handling 30% or so. Pacheco in particular is an excellent receiver out of the backfield. He caught 19 balls for 130 yards. That was on top of 515 rushing yards. We like Pacheco a lot, and he's a strong price-adjusted play here at 5,700, expected to handle most of the work against a team in Temple that does not have a strong run defense. And then in the receiving core, you have the top 3 options back: Bo Melton, Shameen Jones, and Aaron Cruikshank. Melton caught 47 balls for 638 yards last year. Jones wasn't too far behind, 34 passes. And Cruikshank is somebody that is more of a gadget slot player, but he caught 37 passes himself. Cruikshank is extremely affordable at 4,500. And I like this Rutgers team a lot as 14-point favorites. This is a pretty good spot to target the Scarlet Knights overall. Not something we've said a lot about Rutgers in the past, but overall, this is a pretty good game to target for DFS, especially on the Rutgers side, looking at Vidral and the receivers, and Pacheco. Game 2, we have Boise State taking on UCF. Both these teams underwent coaching changes, which I want to highlight here. Boise State's moving to Andy Avalos, who's more of a defensive-minded coach. He has ties to Boise State, but he most recently coached at Oregon. On the other side, UCF, you're moving forward with Gus Malzahn. This game has a very high total at 68.5, but the coaching staffs make me lean towards the under here. UCF, they led the league in plays per game last year. They're not going to be that fast this year. UCF, they are the 5-point favorite. Both these teams implied team totals north of 30. A lot of shootout potential here. UCF has the higher total, nearly 37 points. So that is something we should look at right away. But we'll start with the Boise side. First thing to mention here, their starting quarterback, Hank Bachmeier, is back from injury he sustained last year. He should be locked in option here. Doesn't offer any dual threat ability. And at 6,500, I think he's going to be used in stacks, not someone you want to run solo. The running backfield, George Halani's back from injury. He was listed as the clear starter. Andrew Van Buren was listed third string behind Cyrus Habibi Lukoyo, who's a transfer from Oregon. George Halani is the only one I want. Rusher over 1,000 yards in 2019, 26 receptions. He should be more of a bell cow in this offense if he's healthy. Then in the receiver room, you have a target monster in Khalil Shakir, 37.5% target share last year, average over 100 yards per game. He's expensive, but this is shootout potential. He's somebody you want to certainly look at. From there, the depth chart was really shaken up. C.T. Thomas is a former starter, but they listed him behind Stephen Cobbs, who's 4,100 on DraftKings, somebody you could look to. Only had a 4% target share last year, just had 8 targets. So that would be a place where we expect maybe a timeshare, but Cobbs is cheap. And then the last starter was actually listed as Octavius Evans, who's been hurt throughout most of his Boise State career, listed ahead of Billy Bowens. Some potentially cheap options, but for me, it's basically going to be trying to get Shakir or move on. For UCF, we have a locked-in returning starter, Dylan Gabriel, very expensive. I'm a little worried about Gabriel because this team led the league in plays per game. He's going to be seeing a reduction in volume. He's somewhat mobile, but he's very expensive on this slate. The thing that keeps him in play is the overall total in this game is still very high. He's stackable with Jalen Robinson, the leading returner, 22% target share there. He's stackable with Ryan O'Keefe, who's expected to play in the slot and take on a major role. They vacate targets from Trey Nixon and Marlon Williams, 2 big players out of the offense. So Ryan O'Keefe is a burner, someone you can use downfield. The last starter is a 3-man timeshare. It's Brandon Johnson, Nate Craig-Myers, and then Jordan Johnson way down here. I think you can mix and match those players, but I would try to get one of the top 2 options. Tight end Jake Hescock, not used quite as much. In the backfield, you have Isaiah Bowser, former Northwestern player, listed as the starter. He is listed ahead of Johnny Richardson, who's second on the depth chart, Mark Anthony Richards third. Bowser's the best price-adjusted play in the backfield overall. But this is a game you want to stack. Big game. I'm a little worried about the under coming through, but again, the total's just so high in this game, and it has back and forth affair. Some of the other higher total games are not as much shootouts as this one, so it's one to certainly look at. Game 3, we have East Carolina taking on Appalachian State. This is an interesting game to talk about. It's a low totaled game, 56.5, just slightly ahead of the total we saw in Rutgers Temple. East Carolina is a 10-point underdog to App State, so App State's total is above 30. East Carolina leaves a lot to be desired, so not a team we really want to get to too much. But just to touch on this team, they have a good dual threat quarterback in Holton Ahlers under center. This East Carolina team does play fast. They run a lot of plays, and they're pretty pass heavy. Holton Ahlers, when they're not passing, is also a dual threat, so having him a part of that running game is nice. I think he's an option in GPPs, but he's not a strong one. Running back, you're going to see the timeshare between Rajai Harris and Keaton Mitchell. Middling plays, I would prefer Mitchell based on price. The only part of ECU, I think, which is somewhat reasonable here are the receivers, where you have proven commodities in Tyler Snead and CJ Johnson, both fairly cheap. Snead in particular, 26% target share last year. We've seen Johnson very involved in this offense as well. I have interest in both, particularly Johnson on DraftKings. The last starter is going to be a timeshare, but Audi Omotosho was listed as the starter. He's very, very cheap. Sub 4K on DraftKings, sub 6K on FanDuel. He's somebody you could look to as just a pure punt option. But overall, you don't want to play too much East Carolina because of the low total here. App State, on the other hand, is a team you can certainly look to. They changed signal callers. Chase Bryce comes in, the former Clemson and Duke signal caller. Does have some dual threat ability, but he's taken a ton of sacks in his career. App State's offensive line should be an upgrade, keeping Chase Bryce in play. The problem is App State is just a super run-heavy team, and they're pretty slow in plays per game. You want to look to their backfield. Daytrich Harrington is not going to play here, which leaves basically a 2-man committee between Cameron Peoples and Nate Noel. Nate Noel is very, very cheap, and when we've seen injuries to this backfield in the past, he will step up. He's somebody to certainly look to here. Peoples will see the lion's share of the workload. He's also affordable. I like both of these options in the run game. The pass game is a little more difficult to get to. You have Thomas Hennigan, the returning leading receiver. However, you had Corey Sutton, out for the season last year with an injury. He's 4,900. Their previous leading receiver, they will be cannibalizing each other a little bit more, listed as co-starters in the depth chart with Jalen Virgil. The only clear starter listed was Malik Williams, who really emerged at the end of last year. But now you have 4 options in a receiving room that is likely to run the ball a lot. I would lean towards Peoples and Nate Noel in this offense, but you could potentially look to them in GPPs. Again, East Carolina, not a team we want to invest a lot in today. Our next game, we have South Florida taking on NC State. An actually interesting game here with a 59 total. USF is another one of these teams, a severe underdog, 18.5 points, barely implied for 20 points. We don't want to take much from this team overall. Basically, South Florida, they're going to be pretty pass heavy. They're going to run a lot of plays. Charlie Weiss Jr. is their OC, so we know it's going to be an up-tempo style of offense. But Cade Fortin is the starting quarterback here. Some dual threat ability, but he's never really gotten a long leash at USF. And we're not expecting them to be very productive here against NC State. The running backfield is a timeshare, not great. The receiving room is completely unsettled. You have Bryce Miller, Xavier Weaver, Latrell Williams, Omarion Dallas, and Yusef Terry, DeMarcus Gregory, all candidates to play. And this team didn't release a depth chart. So you're just basically flipping coins here if you think you can predict who is going to start and see time for this USF team. The returning leading receiver is Bryce Miller, but again, he's price adjusted. I'm not trying to take anybody on USF today. NC State, on the other hand, has a near 40-point implied team total. You have Devin Leary back from injury. The team was significantly better with Leary under center. They're a team that typically skews slightly run heavy. They were losing games last year, so they had to increase their pass rate. They were 41st in overall pass rate. And Leary, he is viable in GPPs, but a little expensive for what you're getting in a player that's not really mobile. I would look more towards the backfield, where historically you're seeing a 3-man committee, which narrowed to 2 last year, and Zonovan Knight and Ricky Person. They were almost dead even in touches, and Zonovan Knight actually had 5 fewer attempts than Ricky Person, despite being significantly more efficient on the ground. Zonovan Knight over 100 more rushing yards than Person. That is reflected in price, but Zonovan Knight still very cheap, and you could see both backs productive in this backfield tonight. Zonovan Knight at 6,100 on DraftKings is somebody to certainly look at. Top 3 pass catchers are back for NC State as well. It is Emeka Emezi, Thayer Thomas, and Devin Carter. You're going to see Thayer Thomas play primarily in the slot, but the target shares between these players was fairly spread across the board, not one elite target share number. Emezi is the best returning receiver they have, a 19% target share, average 61.5 yards per game. I think you could look to Emezi or just paying all the way down for Thayer Thomas. Their primary slot receiver makes the most sense here at 4,400. On FanDuel, you have Devin Carter, more of an option. He is the cheapest receiver on FanDuel. That is somewhere I would look there, but primarily looking at the backfield for NC State. However, you could take a look at stacks and GPPs if they get it done through the air. Again, really high implied team total. The next game is a complete disaster. It is Tennessee taking on Bowling Green. And Bowling Green, arguably the worst team in all of college football. They're right up there with UMass. They have a 13-point implied team total as 35-point underdogs to Tennessee. Tennessee is not the Tennessee of old. They underwent a coaching change this offseason, bringing in Josh Heupel, the aforementioned coach from UCF, who led the country in plays per game. Tennessee had a mass exodus of players, but we are expecting this Tennessee team to at least play fast, and they're huge favorites here. 48 implied team total. You got to have somebody on Tennessee. Won't spend much time on Bowling Green. Basically, you have Matt McDonald under center, not somebody that was ever efficient, not a dual threat, not someone we want to target. The backfield is going to be a split between Terrion Stewart and Jason Patterson. Their leading receiver that's returning is Tyrone Broden, just a 15% target share from him. You're only taking a look at these these Bowling Green players in massive GPPs. I don't even think you want them in run backs to Tennessee stacks. On the Tennessee side, you had 2 transfers come in at quarterback, Joe Milton and Hendon Hooker. Joe Milton, the former Michigan signal caller, wins the job. Some mobility with him, completed 57% of his passes last year. He's somebody we definitely want to look at in tournaments. Pretty cheap based on the total, based on the kind of offense we know Tennessee will run and his dual threat ability. So looking at Milton heavily, the only worry is that they factor Hendon Hooker in a little bit as massive favorites here. there's a reasonable expectation that both will play because game script projects to get out of hand here. So you probably get a look at both signal callers, but Milton should be able to get enough done while he's on the field. The backfield is going to be Tyon Evans and Jabari Small listed as co-starters. They lost both Eric Gray and Ty Chandler this year. Small carried 27 times for 117 yards last year. He's an all-purpose back, but Evans is a four-star recruit, the number one junior college running back from this year's class. He should be a little bit more owned, carry the ball a little bit more here. So Tyon Evans is the player we want to look at. In the receiving room, you certainly want some of these Tennessee players at least to consider because of the pass-heavy nature of the Josh Heupel offense. Jalen Hyatt and Cedric Tillman were listed as the clear starters on the depth chart. Tillman pretty affordable at $5K flat, somebody you should certainly look to. He only had 13 targets last year, but we'll be seeing an uptick in volume. The last starting position was listed as co-starters between Velus Jones and Javonte Payton. Velus Jones, their leading receiver from at least returning numbers, he's been banged up in camp. So potentially Javonte Payton, the Mississippi State transfer, gets a little bump up here. But I'm looking primarily at Hyatt and primarily at Tillman, the two players listed on the depth chart solo. But I really have interest in these Tennessee running backs. UCF's offense under Heupel last year was pretty balanced, about 50-50 pass to run ratio. So there's going to be a lot of players that are handling the ball in this offense. Makes it a very attractive situation here. The marquee game of the night is going to be Ohio State taking on Minnesota. This game has a 63.5 point total. Ohio State is a 14-point favorite, giving them an implied team total just shy of 40, putting them right in that range of teams we want to target. So Ohio State is the new quarterback in CJ Stroud. Basically, no sample size on Stroud whatsoever. He can be played at 8K if he is elite in the territory of Justin Fields and Dwayne Haskins and the Ohio State quarterbacks we've seen recently. He's going to surge up to around 10K in future games, but he's not a dual threat. At least he wasn't recruited as a dual threat, and we're not sure what we have with him yet. So I think maybe taking a wait and see approach with Stroud makes sense other than stacks in tournaments. And that's because you have Chris Olave shockingly affordable on DraftKings at 6,700. Even Garrett Wilson is not very expensive. You can honestly stack both of them with some of the mid-price players available on the slate and get full Ohio State stacks, which I love. In the backfield, unfortunately, we just don't know who's going to receive most of the work. Master Teague split with Trey Sermon last year. Poor efficiency from Teague. Mayan Williams stepped up to play a little bit towards the end when both Teague and Sermon suffered injuries at various points. Mayan Williams was listed as the starter on the depth chart, making him pretty affordable on both sites, particularly FanDuel. The only worry is you already have a two-man timeshare, and then you have a five-star recruit in Trevion Henderson waiting to see carries as well. This could be a three-man split in the backfield. In GPPs, you can take a look at some of these players, but it's going to be really volatile early in the season. Not one I want to spend a lot of lineups on, but one I will have some exposure to. Minnesota, their team total is really low on this slate. Tanner Morgan, one of the least mobile signal callers we have, his efficiency has plummeted since the loss of Tyler Johnson and Rashad Bateman. 6,200 is too expensive. I'm off him. Mohamed Ibrahim is very, very expensive. He averaged 150 rushing yards per game and 30 opportunities, which is targets plus carries. You love him in matchups where you're going to see Minnesota competitive. This is not one of those situations. Ohio State, very good defense. I tend to shy away from Ibrahim. He has the best volume on the entire slate, but I think you can replicate some of that volume with efficiency in situations like Tennessee and Rutgers. However, if you're looking for a pay-up option at running back, Ibrahim's the best. I'm a little wary of it here. The receiving room is completely unsettled. Chris Autman-Bell is the leader of the returners, but he's been injured all camp. He's questionable for this game, so watch him. Maybe some value opens up. Other two starters are Daniel Jackson and transfer Dylan Wright, neither of whom are proven. And this would only be viable in runbacks, stacks of the game, which I don't particularly love. Morgan is a hard guy to stack because of his negative sack yardage overall. I won't have much Minnesota in this game against a fierce Ohio State secondary that returns 7 of its top 8 players. Moving along, we have 2 games left. These games are not in the FanDuel slate, but they are on DraftKings because they are FCS. Our first one is Eastern Washington taking on UNLV, which is a shockingly competitive game. You look at this game overall, it has a 66.5 point total, and UNLV is a 3-point favorite. Eastern Washington is priced in the Temple range, but they have an implied team total of 32, nearly 32. UNLV just shy of 35. This has back and forth shootout affair potential written all over it, similar to Boise State and UCF. So let's give you a brief background on Eastern Washington and then talk about the team. So this Eastern Washington team overall is extremely pass heavy. They passed at 59.5% of the time last year. They ran 84.4 plays per game. That is one of the fastest teams we are going to see. Now, they're an FCS team, so maybe we can bump them down in efficiency. But then again, UNLV is just a 3-point favorite here. Bookmakers are expecting Eastern Washington to move the ball. Eric Barriere is their starting quarterback. He completed 62% of his passes, 19 touchdowns, 7 interceptions last year. He's a pretty decent dual threat option as well. He finished with 144 rushing yards on 98 attempts. He will take sacks occasionally, but we're talking about an extremely cheap dual threat quarterback going up against this UNLV team. He's a really strong option at 5,200. The running backs in Dennis Merritt and Tamarick Pierce, they're going to split the backfield overall. Prince, 86 carries to Merritt, 71. Merritt was the better pass catcher at 10. I think you can take either of them. I would look more towards Merritt as the underdog. In the receiving room, Talalo Laimu Jones at 5K flat is a potential target here. He is a player that caught 48 balls for 759 yards, played 90% of the time in the slot, a 24% target share at 5K with an immense team total. Certainly someone you want to look to. Freddie Roberson, 19% target share. Andrew Boston, 13% target share. Those are your top 3 returners, and I think you just want to focus on these 3, with Laimu Jones being the best option at 5K flat. Just downright bargain for him. On the other side for UNLV, unfortunately, you have a platoon at quarterback. Not sure if we're going to see more Brumfield or Rogers. I would assume Brumfield is the player they trot out first. He did miss time in camp, allowing Justin Rogers to take some snaps, but you don't want to play either of these guys. They're going to be splitting time. Charles Williams is quietly a pretty decent option here. Handled nearly 52% of the running back carries last year, which easily led the backfield, and he also caught 13 balls. The backup, Charles Magyar, he only carried the ball 2 times all season last year. So this is something you could look to. Charles Williams, a slight favorite in the game with a massive total pass catching upside. 5,900 is a fantastic price for him. In the receiving room, Kyle Williams is also way too cheap at 5,400. He had a 28.5% target share. This UNLV team passed the ball 50.1% of the time. That was 40th in the country. He has a very strong target share. The number 2 and 3 receivers are Zyle Griffin and Steve Jenkins. Zyle Griffin's very cheap at 3,900. Steve Jenkins, 4,800. I'm probably just trying to find the extra money to get up to Kyle Williams, but both are options in this game. It's a strong game to target overall, and I think the second most stack-worthy game we have on the slate. Our final contest, we'll zip through this one. It is a DraftKings only game. We have Southern Utah taking on Arizona State. We saw Southern Utah just get absolutely waxed in their last game. It's a team that went 1-5 last year. Justin Miller couldn't get anything done. The backfield split basically 5 ways. David Moore led the team in attempts, still not targeting him, finished with 5 yards. The receiving room, Jude Crockett is the best option here. He had 5 targets, turned that into 6 yards. You're just Xing out this Southern Utah team implied for 5.5 points. Arizona State, you're going to have to balance how much you want to target a team implied for 50 points versus the chance that they bench their starters. So this Arizona State team, Jaden Daniels is arguably one of the top 3 signal callers on this slate overall. He's a proven commodity, now a 3-year starter. Didn't get to see much of him last year in an abbreviated Arizona State season, but strong mobility, efficient passing stats. The only issue is Southern Utah probably doesn't keep this game close. So where does he rank for you? In the backfield, it's a 2-man committee when we are in competitive games with Rashad White and DeMonte Trayanum. White is extremely efficient, averaged over 100 yards per game, only saw 50 opportunities, had 130 more yards than our counterpart Trayanum, which is just incredible efficiency. Strong pass catcher here too. This is somebody you certainly want to look to in DFS. 5,900. I even think you can get to the number 3 in Daniel Nagata at 4,300 on DraftKings. This is going to be an absolute slaughtering. All 3 of these backs are in play. The receiving room is much harder to get to. They listed a bunch of co-starters. The only clear starter is Johnny Wilson. That is reflected in price at $6,600. Co-starters: Brian Thompson, Ricky Pearsall, LV Bunkley Shelton, Andre Johnson. The only one who's really cheap is Andre Johnson. Just 3 targets last year. He's maybe the guy you want to get to because of price. Overall, like Purcell's 4,600. I think they lean more on the run game here as just 44.5 point favorites over Southern Utah. It's a tough game to get to overall because of the massive spread. But that'll do it for today's slate. Looking a lot at stacks. Make sure you check out all the data we have on Awesemo.com. Leave any questions you have in the comment section. We'll be back for live before lock tonight before the slate kicks off. Videos for Friday and Saturday. We will have it all. Of course, hit the thumbs up button on the way out. Subscribe to the channel. Hit the notification bell. I'm Matt Gajewski on Twitter at Matt_Gajewski. You can always find me there. But thanks again, guys. We will see you again next time.